Hi friends, hope you are doing well. I'm Dr. Ganguly. Welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to respond to a question on my channel, and this question is how can you actually prepare for a job interview, especially if you are somebody who is a PhD student or has finished their PhD degree. Now in many such situations you have to come to an interview and you get asked questions by companies, you may be asked questions by research labs and so on. And today I'm going to primarily focus at questions being asked in industry research settings, which are often the jobs which many PhD people aspire to. So I'm going to divide this video into 5 parts. So let's begin. Now the number one question you are going to get is tell us about yourself. And this is a question which is supposed to help you to introduce yourself to the committee. But what happens is that many students get very flummoxed by this question. They have never done introspection or prepared for this question. So it's a good idea to prepare for this question. Of course, you begin with your name. You have to give the background you have in terms of the degrees you have obtained, specifically the bachelor's, master's, and PhD degree, and also the field in which you have obtained your degree. So this may be in mechanical engineering, it may be in mathematics, it may be in psychology, or any other field. Now, once you have finished this particular introduction, you can point out about your specific PhD thesis accomplishment, or in some cases, if you are a master's candidate, about your master's thesis. Now, this particular factor should only be mentioned if the job you are applying for is directly related to your PhD degree or your master's degree. Now, in some case, what happens is that they are recruiting for a general person. That is, they are interested in somebody in computer science, in somebody in mathematics, in somebody in biotechnology. So it's not a good idea to then go deep into your specific problem at this stage. So again, whatever answer you give to any of these questions should be based on the job description. So do a good study of the job description, look at the different keywords they have pointed out, and if these keywords are directly related to your research, then you can mention that. And if these keywords are related to your field in general, then you can mention the fact that you are an expert in the broad field. Maybe you are an expert in fluid mechanics, maybe you are an expert in machine learning, or maybe you are an expert in some aspect of psychology. Now, the question number two, which you often get, is why should we give you this job? And this again perturbs many PhD people because they think that, well, you have called me to this particular setting, so I guess you should know the answer to this question. Now, of course, they have selected you through your resume, through your curriculum vitae, and they have called you. But this is a provocative question, and the object of this provocation is to make you list out your different strengths to make a good fit for the job description. So here what they want you to do is that they want you to link your degrees, link your jobs obtained previously, and also to link your background in terms of your research to the job description concerned. So again, the job description becomes very important. So what you need to do is that you need to look at your background and see how it fits in well with the job, and then make the case as to why hiring you as a candidate is going to help their company or help their research lab. So in all cases, remember that the primary objective of any employee is to help their manager or to help their boss, and this is something which people don't immediately understand. But if you are able to in some ways convince that hiring manager that you are going to help him or her perform his duties better, deliver results better, and move up in the corporate system or in the research lab system, then they are likely to recruit you at this stage. Now, it's very important during the interview to maintain a cool profile, and it's a balance between being completely nonchalant or not bothering about anything and being too nervous. So you have to maintain a middle ground somewhere else. So remember that the interview is not just a check on your technical competence, but also in your check on your behavior under pressure, under adversarial situations, and so on. Now, the question number three, which you are often going to get, are questions from your resume and CV. And here, one of the committee members is going to take a particular line from your CV, which is interesting to him or her, and is going to ask you to talk about this particular project. Now, this is very likely to be something from your thesis, from your projects, from your problems which you have done, and so on. And so One of the things, of course, you must do is that you must own all the things you have written in your resume. So if you have done any problem in your PhD or master's thesis, make sure that you write this out in bullet points as projects, because the industry and research people like to think of everything in terms of projects. And therefore what they are going to do is they are going to ask you to describe some of these projects. They are going to ask you some of the problems you faced in doing this project, and they are also going to ask you to discuss some of the important results you obtained out of this particular project. So during this discussion, of course, you must seem to be excited. Remember, you have to project your best self, and if you are somewhat excited, if you are talking in a manner which shows your excitement, then they will feel that you are a person who is committed to research, and they feel more comfortable in recruiting you. Nowadays, I've seen some people putting things on their CV and resume which they have only a cursory knowledge of. So people may put Python or C++ or Julia or SQL on their resume or CV just to see that their marketability goes up. But I would tell you that do not put these things unless you have a decent level of mastery in it, because what can happen is that if you put something like Python in it, they may actually call a Python expert and subject you to an interview on that particular programming language, and that's going to be much more difficult than the simple things you have learned from some book. For example, you may learn Fahrenheit to centigrade conversion or simple problems, but the problems they often ask you in these interview settings may be much more difficult. So you should clearly mention what is the level of your knowledge as far as any particular problem is there. Now, the next question is actually questions from your thesis and projects. Now, in most cases, this question is asked by the PI who is trying to recruit you, or a senior scientist. And again, this is a way to critique your thesis. So they may actually try to point out that your thesis may actually be not of any use to the research community. And what they expect from you is a response that you are going to defend your thesis vehemently, and you are going to say something positive about that. Remember that most of science is also based on a kind of system which is similar to law. That is, there is a prosecution and there is a defense and there is a judge. So essentially you are the defense here, so they are trying to prosecute you. So some people get very perturbed by the kind of questions they are being asked, by the tone of the examiner and so on, and they can get very disturbed by this questioning. But again, you need to own your complete thesis. You need to be able to describe your thesis in 3 to 4 sentences. So this is why I say that the abstract is very important. Whenever you are writing a thesis, you should take a lot of time to write the abstract. The abstract should be 1 page itself, not more than that, because that's the amount of information which you can put into your brain. And remember to practice 3 to 4 sentences, which completely gives your research outline. So again, one sentence should introduce the topic, 1 or 2 sentences should give the methods you have used, and one sentence should give the basic result of the particular work. So it's very important to be able to give this kind of pitch to the PI concerned if you are looking to them to recruit you. So this is something which is very important. Now, in some cases, what happens is that the industry people, especially if they're coming from a computer type of background, and remember, as far as industry is concerned, they only look at the world in terms of either software or hardware. So unless you are somebody who is coming from an experimental background, they look at everything else as being software, including things like mathematics and so on. So what happens is that they may actually want to see your thesis as a software development problem. Now, you may not like this kind of thinking, but that's the reality of the world out there. So maybe you have done some computational fluid dynamics problem, and they may think that you have written a large code in some programming language to solve certain equation and to solve a particular problem. So you need to be able to change your mind to talk in these terms, to actually also look at software aspects. For example, if you ever get a chance, try to delve into high performance computing, try to delve into anything to do with using GPUs instead of CPUs and so on, and also parallel computing. These are all going to enhance your chances in getting any job. Now, of course, there are situations where your thesis may match the job description very well. If you're a person working in the bio domains, and maybe you're working on a certain virus or a certain bacteria or a certain disease and the company or the research institute is looking at this exact problem, then of course you can go deep into your PhD thesis. There may be some discovery in your PhD thesis itself which is of great interest to these people, and in that case your chances of getting a job become very high. So in many cases when PhDs get jobs, it's got nothing to do with their background, with their CGPA, even with their papers, but ultimately with the fact that the people recruiting them actually want a specialist in that field. It's very hard to train somebody for 5 years. So again, you are coming fully trained and they like that fact. Now let's come to point number 5, which is the questions from any listed or given papers. And most of the time, if you have written a CV for a job as a PhD, you would have listed some publication here. It may be a conference publication, it may be a journal publication. And what may happen is that one or two of these committee members may have read these particular papers and they may have some questions on them. So very often the PI may read a paper or he may depute this job to one of his subordinates and they may grill you on a particular paper. So this is something very important, that if you have written a certain number of papers, you need to own these papers. And this is why I have talked about the point that PhD students and PhD graduates should actually try to write a reasonable number of papers. Now, if you have written 5 to 7 papers, it is a much easier thing to own all these papers and to know all the methods, to know all the details, to know all the graphs which you have made and so on. And especially if you have written them with just your supervisor. If you are somebody who has written these papers with many people, maybe 10 people, maybe 15 people, then you may only have done a small part of the work. And so what happens in that case, the student has a more difficult time answering any particular question. So if somebody randomly picks a paper and asks you any question on that, you should be prepared for that. Now, I'd say that you actually do not need to list all your papers on the CV. So you can put selected publications in case you are applying for a particular job. You do not want to put all the papers which may not be relevant to the particular job concerned. So this also helps the situation that the person may feel that you have targetedly worked in a certain field, and so they will ask you questions only from those papers. So always remember that whatever you are putting in your CV or resume, you have to own all these material when you are going for an interview setting. Now, one of the things the PI always like to do is to ask you that where does your thesis lead to in future? And this is something which most researchers are always looking for. They are actually looking for concepts from you. So in many cases, they may give you a job, they may not give you a job, but they are also going to use the interview as a learning experience. In fact, most of the learning in academia takes place through these various interactions one has through various meetings, through various conferences, through various seminars, and so on. That is why you see so many seminars, so many PhD defenses are so popular in a university, because most of the learning takes place through this means. It doesn't take place through books and so on. So these are some of the important points to prepare for. Of course, like I mentioned before, it's always a good idea to prepare at some of these things and go for the particular interview situation rather than just go blindly there. And make sure that you own your CV and that you know some of the basic things in the field. Sometimes they can spring math questions at you if you are in any STEM type of discipline. So you should be also able to answer any math question or own any math which you have done in your field. So they may ask you various questions on some of the equations you have given and some of the results you have obtained in your papers and so on. So this was my video for today. I will leave some videos on the end screen which will help you further your research and education journey. And I will see you in a video sometime soon. See you then.